The Galactic Council chamber was enormous, a sphere of polished stone that could hold representatives from 50 different species. Today it was packed. News of the Kelran Nebula incident had spread across the galaxy faster than light, carried by diplomatic channels and news networks. Everyone wanted to hear what humanity would say to defend their actions. Ambassador Yuna stood in the center of the chamber on a floating platform that rose from the floor. She was in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. She had served as humanity's voice in the Galactic Union for 10 years, navigating the complex politics of dozens of alien species. She was used to being criticized, but today felt different. Around her, arranged in circular tiers that reached up toward the domed ceiling, sat the representatives of the Galactic Union, the Mirani, with their delicate features and luminescent skin, the Tolvec, tall and thin with feathered crests, the Rendari, stocky and muscular with 4 arms, dozens of other species all watching her with expressions that ranged from gratitude to horror. Council Director Thelvan, a Tolvec known for his pacifist philosophy, stood at the highest tier. His voice echoed through the chamber, amplified by the acoustics and translation technology. Ambassador Yuna, you stand before this council to answer for the actions of Terran Alliance vessels in the Kelran Nebula sector. Our records indicate that your military forces destroyed 23 Krathok vessels and eliminated an entire military base. Casualty estimates exceed 10,000 Krathok warriors. This council demands an explanation. Yuna looked up at him without flinching. What explanation do you need, Director? We received a distress call. We responded. We eliminated the hostile forces responsible for the attack. This seems straightforward to me. A murmur ran through the chamber. Some species nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably. The Mirani representative, a female named Sevara whose own people had lost the Harmony's edge, stood up. Ambassador Yuna, on behalf of the Mirani people, I must express our gratitude. Your swift action prevented the Krathok swarm from claiming more victims, however. She hesitated. The manner in which you achieved this victory troubles many in this chamber. You used weapons that the Galactic Union considers excessive. You destroyed an entire base without attempting negotiation. You took no prisoners. You're correct, Yuna said simply. We did all those things. Would you like to know why? Thelvan raised a hand. We would hear your justification, though I warn you that violence in excess of necessity violates 17 interstellar conventions. Yuna smiled, but it was not a warm expression. Let's talk about those conventions. How many of them did the Krathok swarm sign? How many did they follow? When they attacked the Harmony's edge, did they attempt negotiation? Did they take prisoners according to your rules of war? The Krathoks are not members of the Galactic Union, another representative called out. They do not follow our laws. Exactly. Yuna's voice rang out clearly. They don't follow your laws. They don't respect your conventions. They attack and harvest and kill, and you respond by retreating, by sealing off sectors, by writing off your own people as acceptable losses. You have rules for warfare that only work when both sides follow them. But the Krathoks don't follow rules, so you surrender territory and hope they go away. The chamber erupted in protests and arguments. Thelvan called for order, his voice barely cutting through the noise. When silence finally returned, he looked down at Yuna with something that might have been sadness. Ambassador, we understand your frustration, but there are principles that separate civilization from barbarism. We do not use excessive force. We do not commit genocide. We seek peaceful solutions whenever possible. And how has that worked out? Yuna asked quietly. How many systems have you lost to the Krathoks? How many ships? How many lives? The Harmony's edge sent a distress call. Your nearest vessel was 3 days away.
3 days?
And you accepted that as normal. As acceptable. Because your principles are more important than actually saving lives. A Rendari delegate stood, his forearms folded across his broad chest. What you call principles, we call civilization. Your species comes from a death world, Ambassador. We understand this. Your planet tried to kill you every day of your evolution. You had to become violent to survive. But we evolved on gentler worlds. We learned cooperation. Peace. We built a society based on mutual respect and minimal harm. And when someone doesn't respect that society, Yuna challenged. When someone only understands violence, what then? You retreat. You hide. You hope they go away. That's not civilization. That's cowardice dressed up in fancy words. The chamber went deadly silent. Several representatives looked shocked. A few looked angry. But more than a few looked thoughtful, even ashamed. Delvin's crest flattened against his skull, a sign of deep distress. Ambassador Yuna, you go too far. This council has maintained peace across hundreds of systems for centuries. We have resolved conflicts through dialogue and compromise. We have built something beautiful and fragile. And now your species arrives with your weapons and your violence, and you threaten to tear it all apart. Your peace was already torn apart, Yuna replied. The Krathoks did that. The pirates who raid your trade routes did that. The slavers who steal your citizens did that. You just chose not to see it because addressing it would require you to do something you find uncomfortable. It would require you to fight. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from dozens of species. Humanity doesn't want war. We don't enjoy violence. We would prefer to live in your peaceful galaxy and never have to fire a shot. But we will not let distress calls go unanswered. We will not abandon people who need help just because helping them is dangerous or messy or violates your sensibilities. That's not who we are. Sevara, the Mirani representative, spoke again. Her voice was soft but carried clearly through the chamber. Ambassador, I lost friends on the Harmony's edge. Captain Velthar was a dear colleague. When I heard his final transmission, when I learned that help was 3 days away, I felt a despair deeper than I can describe. Then I heard that human ships had arrived, that they had fought the Krathoks, that they had won, and I felt hope again. She paused, struggling with emotion. I understand why this council is troubled by your methods. They are harsh, brutal even, but I also understand that without those methods the Krathoks would still control that sector. They would still be hunting, and more ships would be sending distress calls that no one would answer. Thank you, Representative Sevara, Delvin said. But gratitude does not absolve violations of interstellar law. This council must decide how to respond to humanity's actions. Yuna spread her hands. Then decide. Condemn us, sanction us, expel us from the Galactic Union if you must. But know this, we will continue to answer distress calls. We will continue to protect those who cannot protect themselves. You can call it barbarism. You can call it excessive. You can call it whatever makes you feel better. But at the end of the day, the people we saved will still be alive, and that matters more than your principles. A new voice spoke from the upper tiers. It was old and rasping, belonging to a Kelvari representative, a species that rarely spoke in council. The young ambassador speaks truth that cuts. For 200 years, my people avoided conflict with the Krathoks. We surrendered 4 colony worlds to them. 4 worlds! We told ourselves it was the civilized choice. That fighting would make us no better than them. But in our hearts we knew the truth. We were afraid. The Kelvari representative stood, his crystalline body refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns. The humans were not afraid. They went into danger to help strangers. They fought when we would not. And now we sit here and judge them for being too effective, for winning too completely. This is shame talking, not justice. More voices joined the debate. The chamber became a storm of arguments and counter-arguments. Some species supported humanity's actions. Others called for severe punishment. Still others seemed torn between gratitude and horror. Finally, Thelvan raised both hands for silence. When the chamber quieted, he looked directly at Yuna. His expression was complex. Anger, fear, reluctant respect, and something that might have been envy. Ambassador Yuna, this council will deliberate on appropriate measures. But I must ask you directly. If another distress call is received, if another species is under attack, will your forces respond with the same methods? Yuna didn't hesitate. Yes, every time. Without fail. That's what Deathworlders do, Director. We survive. And we make sure others survive too. Even if it means killing, especially if it means killing. Because sometimes the only way to stop a predator is to eliminate them completely. You can call that barbaric. My people call it necessary. Thelvan nodded slowly. Then this council has much to consider. You are dismissed, Ambassador. We will summon you when we have reached a decision. Yuna bowed respectfully and stepped off the platform. It lowered her back to the chamber floor where she exited through a side door. As she walked through the corridors of the council building, she felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on her back. Word of the debate had spread. Aliens of all species watched her pass, their expressions unreadable. Recommend immediate assault. The captain of the Relentless, the asteroid hung in space like a malignant tumor. It was massive, easily 5 kilometers across, and its surface was covered with Krathok structures, docking ports, weapon emplacements, communication arrays. The Krathoks had hollowed out the interior and turned it into a forward operating base. According to the Indomitable's scans, there were at least 10,000 warriors inside. Captain Wu Jin of the destroyer, Relentless, studied the tactical display with cold calculation. He was older than Hyunwoo, a veteran of conflicts that most people preferred to forget. His ship carried heavier weapons and thicker armor than a frigate. It was built for exactly this kind of assault. That's a fortress, his tactical officer observed. A direct assault would cost us significant casualties. Then we won't assault it directly, Wu Jin replied. He opened a channel to the other 3 ships. All vessels, tactical conference. Captain Hyunwoo, I'm sending you and your crew our compliments on the earlier engagement. Impressive work. On the Indomitable's bridge, Hyunwoo nodded at the view screen. Thank you, Captain. What's the plan for the asteroid? We're going to crack it open. The Krathoks expect us to try boarding, to fight them on their terms. Instead, we're going to eliminate the terms entirely. Recommendations? Science Officer Hee Jin, who was monitoring the conversation, spoke up. Captain, the asteroid's structural integrity is compromised by their excavations. If we target specific load-bearing sections, we can trigger a cascade collapse. The interior will cave in on itself. Wu Jin smiled grimly. Exactly what I was thinking. Tactical, prepare bunker buster missiles. Full spread. Target the mining shafts and primary support columns. Hyunwoo leaned forward. Captain Wu Jin, what about prisoners? Intel gathering? There was a long pause. Everyone on both bridges knew what Hyunwoo was really asking. The Krathoks had committed atrocities across dozens of systems. They had killed the crew of the Harmony's Edge and countless others. Did they deserve mercy? The Krathoks don't take prisoners, Wu Jin said quietly. They harvest. They consume. They've had 50 years to change their ways. This is their answer. He gestured at the asteroid fortress. No prisoners. No warnings. They made their choice. Hyunwoo felt a weight settle on his shoulders. This was genocide they were discussing. The complete elimination of a Krathok presence in this sector. But he thought of Captain Velthar's final transmission. The terror in that alien voice as the Krathoks boarded his ship. He thought of all the other ships that had sent distress calls that went unanswered because the galaxy was too afraid to fight back. Acknowledged, Hyunwoo said. The Indomitable stands ready to assist. The 4 human ships spread out in a loose formation around the asteroid. The Relentless took point, its massive railguns already glowing with stored energy. The carrier Valkyrie launched its fighter wings, 50 small craft that would provide cover and target verification. The stealth frigate Phantom moved into position to cut off any escape attempts, and the Indomitable, battered but unbroken, added its weapons to the formation. Inside the asteroid, the Krathoks detected the approaching ships and went to battle stations. Weapon emplacements swiveled toward the human vessels. Fighters began launching from hidden bays. The base's shields powered up, a shimmering energy field designed to protect against orbital bombardment. Wu Jin watched the preparations with professional interest. Shields at that strength would stop most Galactic Union weapons. Tactical. What's our penetration probability? 85%, sir. The shields are strong but distributed across a large surface area. Our bunker busters are designed to punch through planetary defenses. This should be manageable. Then let's not waste time. All ships fire at will. The Relentless spoke first. 20 bunker buster missiles streaked toward the asteroid, each one accelerating to incredible velocity before impact. They struck the shields and simply punched through them like they weren't there. The missiles burrowed deep into the asteroid's surface before detonating. The explosions were not visible from outside, but the sensors told the story. Massive internal detonations ripped through the hollowed-out chambers. Support columns shattered. Walls collapsed. Entire sections of the base were crushed under millions of tons of rock. The other 3 ships added their fire. The Valkyrie's fighters made precision strikes on the weapon emplacements, silencing them one by one. The Phantom targeted the docking bays with heavy torpedoes, sealing them shut and trapping the Krathok fighters inside. And the Indomitable focused on the communication arrays, making sure no distress calls could be sent. Inside the asteroid, chaos reigned. The Krathok scrambled to respond to the collapsing structure. Their hive mind tried to coordinate an evacuation, but there was nowhere to go. The docking bays were destroyed. The escape pods were crushed. They were trapped in a dying fortress. Commander Sung-ho watched the sensor readings and felt nothing. No pity, no remorse. These were the same creatures that had torn apart the Harmony's edge. The same creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for decades. They had chosen to be predators. Now they were learning what it meant to be prey. Captain, detecting seismic activity in the asteroid, Hyojin reported. The internal structure is collapsing faster than projected. The entire base will be destroyed within 10 minutes. Any attempts to surrender? Yunwoo asked. Jia checked her console. Negative, sir. We're receiving only radio static, and what the translators interpret as distress calls. No formal surrender. Continue bombardment until the structure is completely destroyed. The assault continued for another 15 minutes. By the time it ended, the asteroid was a fractured ruin, its surface cracked and broken, its interior exposed to vacuum. Debris floated in a wide field around it. There were no energy signatures, no life signs, no movement. 10,000 Krathok warriors were dead, buried in the tomb they had built for themselves. Wu Jin's voice came across the channel, subdued now that the violence was over. All ships cease fire. Conduct a full sweep of the area. I want confirmation of complete elimination. The 4 human vessels spread out, their sensors scanning every fragment of debris, every piece of wreckage. The fighters from the Valkyrie conducted visual inspections of the larger pieces. It took 2 hours to verify, but eventually the reports came back. The Krathok base was completely destroyed. There were no survivors. Captain Wu Jin, this is the Phantom. The stealth frigate's captain reported. We've detected a small vessel attempting to flee the system. Appears to be a Krathok scout ship. Orders? Intercept and destroy. No survivors. No witnesses. The Phantom vanished from sensors, its stealth systems engaging. Minutes later, there was a brief flash of light at the edge of the system. Then nothing. The scout ship was gone. On the Indomitable's bridge, Hyunwoo stood and walked to the view screen. He looked at the ruins of the Krathok base, at the debris field that marked where the swarm had tried to establish a foothold in this sector. He thought about what they had just done, the complete and total elimination of an enemy force. The Galactic Union would be horrified. They would call it excessive, brutal, inhumane. But they weren't the ones who had to listen to distress calls and know they were too afraid to answer. They weren't the ones who had to explain to grieving families why their loved ones died alone in the dark. Communications, send a message to Terran Command, Hyunwoo ordered. The Kelran Nebula is secure. All hostile forces eliminated. No friendly casualties beyond minor injuries. Request orders for next assignment. Jia sent the message, then turned to look at her captain. Sir, permission to speak freely? Granted. What we just did? The Galactic Union is going to lose their minds when they find out. Hyunwoo smiled without humor. Let them. We answered a distress call. We eliminated a threat. That's our job. If they don't like our methods, they can do it themselves next time. But he knew there wouldn't be a next time. The Galactic Union had spent 50 years retreating from the Krathoks. They had written off entire sectors, abandoned their own people, and convinced themselves that some threats were too big to fight. They had forgotten what it meant to defend the helpless. Humanity hadn't forgotten. Humanity couldn't forget, because humans came from a world that tried to kill them every single day, a world where weakness meant death and strength meant survival, a world where predators learned to fear the night because something more dangerous was hunting them. Earth had made humanity into Deathworlders. And now the galaxy was learning what that meant. Sensors are picking up another transmission, Jia said. It's from the Galactic Union. Multiple ships are converging on our position. ETA 4 hours. About time, Wu Jin's voice came over the channel. Let them come. Let them see what happens when someone actually fights back. Let them see what Deathworlders can do when they stop playing by rules that only apply to the weak. Hyunwoo watched the wreckage of the Krathok base drift past the view screen and nodded. The Galactic Union was about to receive a wake-up call. Humanity had arrived in their quiet, peaceful galaxy, and nothing would ever be the same again. In the distance, stars burned cold and eternal, and among them a new legend was being born. The legend of the Deathworlders who heard a cry for help and answered, not with diplomacy or negotiation, but with complete and total annihilation. The space around the Indomitable had become a storm of weapons fire and explosions. Krathok fighters swarmed toward the human frigate in waves, their plasma cannons firing streams of superheated energy. but the ship's point defense systems came alive, filling the void with thousands of rounds per second. Krathok fighters disintegrated before they could get close enough to matter. On the bridge, Tactical Officer Taemin worked his console with the precision of a concert pianist. Every movement had purpose. Every decision was calculated. He routed power from non-essential systems to weapons, prioritized targets based on threat level, and coordinated defensive fire with offensive strikes. It was a deadly dance, and he was the conductor. 3 Krathok cruisers moving to flank us, he reported. They're trying to box us in. Don't let them, Captain Hyunwoo replied. Helm, evasive pattern Delta.
Keep us mobile.
Taemin focused fire on the lead cruiser. I want it disabled. The Indomitable rolled hard to starboard, its engines flaring as it broke away from the attempted encirclement. The Krathoks were used to fighting opponents who relied on shields and armor to absorb damage. They were not prepared for a ship that moved like a fighter despite being the size of a small building. Taemin locked onto the lead cruiser and unleashed everything. Railgun rounds tore through its hull. Missiles detonated against its command structure. Energy weapons sliced through vital systems. The Krathok ship tried to return fire, but its weapons moved too slowly to track the darting human frigate. Within 2 minutes, the cruiser was a drifting wreck, its engines dead and its hull venting atmosphere. Target neutralized. Engaging second cruiser. But the Krathoks were learning. They stopped trying to chase the Indomitable and instead focused on overwhelming it with numbers. Dozens of fighters launched boarding pods, small armored capsules designed to latch onto enemy hulls and burn through. Incoming boarding pods. Chia called out. Multiple impacts on decks 3 through 5. Seal those sections, Hyunwoo ordered. Sung-ho, you're up. In the corridors of Deck 4, Commander Sung-ho watched his tactical display as red markers appeared on the ship's blueprint. 12 boarding pods had successfully attached to the hull. In moments, Krathok drones would be cutting through and pouring into the ship. He opened his comm channel. All teams, defensive positions. Remember your training. Let them come to us. The Marines moved into position with practiced efficiency. They set up overlapping fields of fire at corridor intersections and choke points. Quan planted demolition charges on the walls, ready to bring the ceiling down on top of the enemy if needed. Nari found a high position on an equipment platform where she could see down 2 corridors at once. Dongwoo took point, his vibroblade humming in his hands. The first boarding pod breached the hull with a shower of sparks and molten metal. The circular opening glowed red-hot, then cooled to black. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the Krathoks came through. They were even more terrifying in person than in the briefings. Each drone stood 2 meters tall with 6 legs that could grip any surface and mandibles that could crush bone. Their exoskeletons were matte black and covered in sensor organs that looked like clusters of eyes. They moved with unnatural coordination, flowing into the corridor like water. Sung-ho waited until a dozen of them had entered. Then he gave the order, fire! The corridor erupted in violence. Explosive rounds from marine rifles hammered into the Krathok formation. The first few drones shattered immediately, their exoskeletons cracking under the kinetic impact before the explosive cores detonated. Limbs and chitin fragments flew in all directions, but the Krathoks kept coming. They climbed over the bodies of their fallen, using walls and ceiling to advance. Their plasma weapons returned fire, burning gouges in the metal walls. One Marine took a hit to his armor's shoulder plate and went down. His teammate dragged him back while maintaining suppressive fire. Grenade, Quan shouted. He triggered one of Heejin's special atmospheric grenades. It detonated in the middle of the Krathok formation, releasing a cloud of chemical agents. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The Krathoks stopped moving as one unit. Their coordinated assault dissolved into chaos. Individual drones began acting on instinct, some charging forward recklessly, others retreating, still others freezing in confusion. The hive mind was broken. Light them up, Sung-ho ordered. The Marines opened fire with renewed intensity. Without their coordination, the Krathoks were just targets. Nari picked them off one by one with precise shots to their leg joints. Quan detonated shaped charges that turned sections of corridor into kill zones. Dongwoo charged forward, his powered armor giving him the strength to meet them in close combat. His vibroblade cut through chitin like it was paper. He moved with brutal efficiency, each strike aimed at joints or sensory clusters. A Krathok drone lunged at him with its mandibles open wide. Dongwoo sidestepped, let the creature's momentum carry it past him and drove his blade through the thinner armor on its back. The drone convulsed and went still. The fight lasted less than 5 minutes. When it was over, the corridor was littered with Krathok bodies. Steam rose from the cooling chitin. The Marines did a quick check, 1 minor injury, no deaths. By human standards, it was a good outcome. By Galactic Union standards, it was unthinkable. They had just defeated a Krathok boarding party without losing a single soldier. Deck 4 secure, Sung-Ho reported to the bridge. Moving to clear Deck 3. The pattern repeated across the ship. Every time the Krathoks breached the hull, they met humans who were stronger, faster, and more aggressive than anything they had encountered before. The atmospheric scrubbers did their work, breaking the hive mind and turning a coordinated assault into a slaughter. Within 30 minutes, all boarding parties were eliminated. On the bridge, Hyunwoo received the reports with satisfaction, but the battle in space was far from over. The Krathoks had stopped sending boarding parties and were now trying to destroy the Indomitable with overwhelming firepower. Plasma bolts and kinetic projectiles filled the space around the frigate. Shield strength at 60%, the engineering officer reported. "We can't take this beating forever, Captain." Hyunwoo studied the tactical display. The Krathok fleet had reorganized into a sphere formation, with the human ship trapped in the center. It was a classic siege tactic, but there was something the Krathoks didn't know about human tactics. "Taemin, what's the status of our heavy missiles?" 6 remaining, sir. But if we fire them at this range, we'll take damage from our own explosions. Not if we time it right. Load all 6 tubes. Target the 6 largest concentrations of enemy ships. Helm on my mark. Full emergency thrust toward those coordinates. He pointed at a gap in the Krathok formation. "We're going to create our own exit." The helmsman's eyes widened. "Sir, that's going to push the engines beyond rated capacity." "I know. Do it anyway." "Yes, sir." Hyunwoo opened a ship-wide channel. "All hands brace for high-G maneuvers." He counted down in his head. 3, 2, 1. Mark. Everything happened at once. The 6 heavy missiles launched, streaking toward their targets. The Indomitable's engines flared to maximum power, the entire ship shuddering as it accelerated beyond its design specifications, and Taemin triggered the missile's detonation just as the frigate passed the Krathok defensive line. The explosions were massive. Each heavy missile carried a warhead designed for destroying hardened bunkers or small asteroids. In the confined space of the Krathok formation, they were devastating. Ships were blown apart. Debris became shrapnel that tore through other vessels. The Krathok sphere collapsed into chaos. The Indomitable shot through the gap like a bullet, its shields glowing white-hot from absorbing blast energy. Alarms blared throughout the ship. Systems flickered, but they made it through. "Damage report." Hyunwoo called out, "Shields at 20%. Hull integrity at 85%. Engine 3 is offline. Railgun needs recalibration. But we're still in the fight, sir." Hyunwoo allowed himself a small smile. The Krathok fleet was in disarray. 15 of their ships were destroyed or disabled. The survivors were breaking formation, their hive mind apparently unable to cope with such sudden and overwhelming losses. "All remaining ships are attempting to flee." "Captain," Gia reported, "pursuit course. Don't let them escape." "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Terran Command. 3 ships are en route. The Relentless, the Valkyrie, and the Phantom. ETA 2 hours. Acknowledged. Tell them we'll leave some targets for them." But Hyunwoo had no intention of letting any Krathok escape to warn others. The Indomitable might be damaged, but it was still functional. And its crew had tasted victory. They had faced the terror of the galaxy and beaten it. Now they were going to finish the job. The hunt continued across the Kelran Nebula. One by one, the remaining Krathok ships were run down and destroyed. Some tried to fight. Some tried to hide in the nebula's gases. None succeeded. The Indomitable was relentless. When the 3 Terran reinforcement ships arrived 2 hours later, they found the Indomitable floating among the wreckage of the Krathok fleet. The nebula was filled with debris and the frozen remains of alien warriors. Captain Hyunwoo sent them a simple message. "Welcome to the party. The primary targets are eliminated, but we've detected a Krathok staging base in the asteroid field nearby." The briefing room of the Indomitable was packed with Marines. Commander Sung-Ho stood at the front, a holographic display floating above the table showing detailed scans of Krathok physiology. The images were not pretty. The aliens looked like a nightmare combination of insect and crustacean, with thick exoskeletons, multiple limbs, and mandibles that could crush steel. "Listen up," Sung-Ho said. his voice cutting through the low conversations. What we know about the Krathoks is limited, but it's enough. They're a hive species. They think as one, move as one, kill as one. Their exoskeletons can withstand most Galactic Union standard weapons. They don't negotiate. They don't surrender. They harvest living beings for biomass. Private Quan raised his hand. How tough are we talking, Commander? Sung Ho pulled up a comparison chart. Their chitin armor can stop plasma bolts that would melt through most ship hulls. The Galactic Union has been retreating from them for 50 years because conventional weapons barely slow them down. Good thing we're not using conventional weapons, Sergeant Dongwu said with a grim smile. The other Marines chuckled. It was true. Human weapons were considered excessive by galactic standards. When humanity joined the Galactic Union 20 years ago, the other species were horrified by Earth's military technology. Explosive rounds, chemical weapons, kinetic accelerators that could punch through meters of solid metal, nuclear devices. The list went on. The Galactic Union fought wars with precision energy weapons that disabled rather than destroyed. They had rules about acceptable casualties and proportional responses. They believed in honor and restraint. Humanity believed in winning. Let me be clear, Sung Ho continued. The Galactic Union considers the Krathoks to be an unstoppable force. They've written off entire sectors rather than fight them, but they've never faced Deathworlders before. We're going to show them what happens when predators meet apex predators. He pulled up tactical data on the powered armor suits. Full combat loadout. The armor will amplify your strength by a factor of 10 and can withstand vacuum for up to 6 hours. Your weapons are loaded with armor-piercing explosive rounds. If you encounter Krathok drones, aim for the joints where the exoskeleton is weakest. If you encounter warriors, use grenades first to disorient them, then concentrated fire. Corporal Nari studied the hologram. What about their hive mind, sir? If they all think together, won't they adapt to our tactics? Good question. Science Officer He Jin is working on that right now. Stand by for her briefing. As if on cue, He Jin entered the briefing room carrying a data pad. She was young for a science officer, barely 30. But she had a mind that worked like a quantum computer. She pulled up a new display showing Krathok brain chemistry. The hive mind operates through pheromone communication, she explained. The Krathoks release chemical signals that coordinate their actions. It's incredibly effective in their natural environment, but it has a weakness. The pheromones require a shared atmosphere to work, disrupt the air composition, and the hive mind breaks down. Individual Krathoks will revert to instinct-based behavior, making them far less coordinated. How do we disrupt it? Sung Ho asked. Atmospheric scrubbers. I've modified our environmental systems to detect and neutralize Krathok pheromones. If they board the ship, they'll be fighting blind and confused. Additionally, I've prepared gas grenades that will do the same thing in confined spaces. Sung Ho nodded appreciatively. Outstanding work. What else should we know? Their exoskeletons are strong, but they're not invulnerable. High-velocity kinetic impacts will crack them. Explosive force will shatter them. Fire won't penetrate the armor, but it will heat the interior and cook them alive. They're resilient, but they can die. We just need to hit them harder than the Galactic Union has been willing to. The briefing continued for another hour, covering every scenario they could imagine. Boarding actions, ship-to-ship combat, close quarters fighting, defensive positions, evacuation procedures. By the time Sung Ho dismissed the Marines, everyone knew their role. On the bridge, Captain Hyunwoo stood before the main view screen with Tactical Officer Taemin. They were reviewing the ship's weapons inventory and making final calculations. Railgun ammunition at full capacity, sir, Taemin reported. All missile tubes loaded. Point defense grid is online and calibrated. Energy weapons charged to maximum. Good, what's our tactical assessment? Taemin pulled up a projection. Based on the distress call, we're expecting at least 15 to 20 Krathok vessels. Probably harvesters and fighters, maybe 1 or 2 capital ships. They'll outnumber us significantly. Recommendations? Hit fast and hard. Use the nebula's gases for cover. Target their larger ships first to reduce their overall firepower. Then pick off the smaller vessels before they can swarm us. Hyunwoo studied the projection. What about the Harmony's edge? Taemin's expression darkened. Sir, the distress call is now over 6 hours old. The probability of survivors is less than 1%, but not 0. No, sir, not 0. Hyunwoo turned to Communications Officer Jia. Send a tight beam message to Terran Command. Tell them we're engaging hostile forces in the Kelrun Nebula. and request immediate backup. Include all tactical data we have on the Krathoks. Yes, sir. Message sent. Estimated response time for reinforcements is 4 hours. 4 hours. They would be in combat long before any help arrived. Hyunwoo accepted this without comment. It was the reality of deep space warfare. You fought with what you had where you were and hoped it was enough. Captain, we're approaching the nebula boundary, the helmsman announced. Dropping out of slip space in 30 seconds. All hands, battle stations, Hyunwoo ordered. The ship's alarm blared throughout the corridors. In the Marine barracks, Sung-ho's team sealed their armor and grabbed their weapons. In engineering, the crew prepared for emergency repairs. In medical, doctors set up triage areas and stocked up on trauma supplies. 15 seconds. Hyunwoo gripped the armrest of his command chair. This was always the worst part. The moment before combat when you knew people were about to die but couldn't predict who or how many. He pushed the thought aside. There would be time for grief later. Right now, he needed to be a captain. 10 seconds. The ship shuddered as it began transitioning back to normal space. The view screen showed the swirling colors of slip space collapsing into the familiar starfield. 5 seconds. Hyunwoo's voice was calm and clear. Weapons free. Engage all hostile targets. The Indomitable dropped out of slip space directly behind a Krathok harvester ship. For a moment, there was perfect silence as both sides processed what was happening. Then Taemin's fingers flew across his console. Firing! The railgun mounted on the Indomitable's spine came to life. A tungsten slug the size of a small car accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed and punched through the harvester's hull. The ship's rear section simply ceased to exist, torn apart by the kinetic energy. Atmosphere and debris exploded into space. Target destroyed. Acquiring next target. The battle had begun. All around them, Krathok ships began powering up weapons and changing course toward the human frigate. There were even more than they had estimated, at least 30 vessels of various sizes. And there, in the center of the formation, was the wreckage of the Harmony's Edge, its hull torn open and dark. Detecting no life signs from the Marani vessel, Jia reported quietly. Hyunwoo felt a cold fury settle over him. They were too late. The crew of the Harmony's Edge was dead. But the Krathoks were still here, still feeding on the wreckage, still hunting for more prey. Target all Krathok vessels, Hyunwoo ordered. I want every single one of them destroyed. No warnings, no mercy. They had their chance when they heard that distress call and decided to ignore it. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Krathoks, Jia said. It's a territorial claim. They're demanding we identify ourselves and leave their hunting ground. The bridge went silent. Everyone turned to look at the captain. Hyunwoo's expression could have been carved from stone. Don't respond, he said quietly. Show them what happens when they hunt in our territory. Taemin smiled coldly and turned back to his weapons console. Missiles away. A spread of 40 missiles launched from the Indomitable, each one equipped with guidance systems and high explosive warheads. The Krathoks scattered, their fighters moving to intercept. But human missiles were faster and smarter than anything the Galactic Union used. They weaved through defensive fire, adapted to evasive maneuvers, and struck their targets with devastating precision. 5 more Krathok ships disappeared in brilliant explosions. The nebula's gases lit up with the flash of detonations, casting everything in stark relief, and the Indomitable was just getting started. The bridge of the Harmony's Edge was filled with smoke and the smell of burning circuits. Captain Velthar gripped the armrest of his command chair as another explosion rocked the ship. His hands were shaking. The Marani were a peaceful species, and in his 60 years of life, Velthar had never experienced true violence until today. Hull breach on decks 4 through 7, his navigator called out, her voice cracking with fear. Life support is failing. Through the view screen, Velthar could see them. The Krathok ships looked like massive insects made of metal and chitin, their hulls bristling with weapons and grappling claws. There were at least 20 of them surrounding his diplomatic vessel, and more were arriving every minute. The Kelran Nebula's swirling gases painted everything in shades of purple and red, making the scene look like something from a nightmare. Send another distress call, Velthar ordered. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. All frequencies. Tell anyone listening that the swarm is here. His communications officer worked frantically at her station. Captain, the nearest Galactic Union ship is 3 days away. They won't reach us in time. Velthar knew she was right. He had known it the moment the Krathoks appeared. The Harmony's Edge was a research and diplomatic vessel. It had no weapons. Its shields were designed to protect against cosmic radiation and small debris, not military-grade plasma cannons. They were helpless. A shuddering impact signaled that the Krathoks had begun boarding. Velthar heard the screams from the lower decks through the intercom. The Krathoks did not kill quickly. They harvested living beings, processing them into biomass for their hive. It was a fate worse than death, and everyone on the bridge knew it. "Captain," his first officer said quietly, "it has been an honor serving with you." Velthar nodded. There was nothing left to do. He reached for the communications panel one final time and began recording. "This is Captain Velthar of the Marani vessel Harmony's Edge. To anyone receiving this message, avoid the Kelran Nebula. The Krathok swarm has established a presence here. They show no mercy. They take no prisoners. If you hear this, stay away. Don't make our mistake. Don't." The bridge doors exploded inward. Krathok drones poured through the opening, their multiple legs clicking against the metal floor. Their mandibles clicked and chittered as they advanced. Velthar closed his eyes and waited for the end. 40 light-years away, Communications Officer Gia was ending her night shift aboard the Terran Alliance frigate Indomitable. She was tired and looking forward to her bunk when a priority alert flashed across her console. Her training kicked in immediately. She routed the signal through the translators and felt her blood run cold as she listened. The distress call was old. 2 hours had passed since it was sent. Gia knew what that meant in deep space. 2 hours was more than enough time for a ship to be destroyed, its crew killed or captured. But protocol was protocol. She hit the alarm button and patched the recording through to the bridge. Captain Hyunwoo arrived within minutes, still fastening his uniform jacket. He was a tall man with sharp eyes and a reputation for making quick decisions. He stood behind Gia's station and listened to the entire recording without interruption. When it finished, silence filled the bridge. "Status of the distress call?" Hyunwoo asked. 2 hours and 14 minutes old, sir," Gia replied. "The signal originated from the Kelran Nebula. That's approximately 40 light-years from our current position." "What ships are closer?" Gia checked her display. 3 Galactic Union vessels, sir. The closest is the cruiser Peaceful Dawn. They're about 30 light-years out, but their maximum slipspace speed would put them at the nebula in approximately 70 hours. 3 days, Hyunwoo said. He looked at the star chart on the main view screen. The Kelran Nebula appeared as a glowing cloud of gas and dust, beautiful and deadly. "And us? We can reach it in 8 hours, sir." "But Captain, the call is over 2 hours old. The chances of survivors are irrelevant," Hyunwoo cut her off. Not harshly but firmly. "Someone sent a distress call. We answer. That's what we do." The bridge crew exchanged glances. They knew what this meant. The Kelran Nebula was dangerous territory. The Krathok swarm had been expanding for decades, pushing back every species that tried to stop them. The Galactic Union's strategy was to avoid them, to seal off sectors and write them off as lost. But humans were different. "Helm, set course for the Kelran Nebula, maximum slipspace velocity," Hyunwoo ordered. "Tactical. I want all weapons hot the moment we drop out of slipspace. Communications, send a message to Terran Command. Tell them we're investigating a distress call and may need backup." "Yes, sir." The responses came back in unison. Hyunwoo hit the ship-wide intercom. "All hands, this is the captain. We've received a distress call from a Galactic Union vessel under attack by hostile forces. We're moving to investigate and render assistance. Combat stations. This is not a drill." In the Marine barracks, Commander Sung-ho was already suiting up before the announcement finished. He had served with Captain Hyunwoo for 5 years and knew the man's reputation. When Hyunwoo said they were going into combat, he meant it. Sung-ho began barking orders at his troops. Full combat loadout. "I want powered armor and heavy weapons ready in 15 minutes. The Marines moved with practiced efficiency. Private Kwan checked his demolition charges. Corporal Nari field-stripped her sniper rifle one more time, even though she had cleaned it that morning. Sergeant Dongwoo tested the edge of his vibroblade, the weapon humming to life in his hands. They were veterans, all of them. They had fought in Earth's unification wars, had seen combat in the Australian wastes and the flooded cities of old Korea. They knew what it meant to fight. They knew what it meant to kill. And they knew that sometimes the only way to stop a predator was to become something more dangerous. In the armory, the weapons officer Tae Min prepared the ship's arsenal. Railguns were charged. Missile tubes were loaded. Point defense systems were calibrated. The Indomitable was a frigate smaller than a destroyer but far more maneuverable. It carried enough firepower to take on ships 3 times its size. And right now, every weapon on board was being prepared for immediate use. In her laboratory, Science Officer Haye Jin pulled up every file the Terran Alliance had on the Krathok swarm. There wasn't much. The Krathoks were relatively new to Galactic Union space, and most species were too busy running from them to study them properly. But Hae-Jin was thorough. She noted their hive mind structure, their reliance on pheromone communication, their insectoid biology. She began formulating hypotheses about potential weaknesses. As the Indomitable entered slipspace and the stars stretched into lines of light, Captain Hyun-woo stood on the bridge and thought about the Marani captain who had sent that distress call. He thought about the terror in that alien voice, the resignation. He thought about how the Galactic Union had apparently decided that rescue was impossible, but humans did not leave distress calls unanswered. It was a rule that dated back to Earth's oceans, back when humans first took to the seas in wooden ships. When someone was in danger, you helped them, even if it cost you, even if it was dangerous, because someday you might be the one sending the distress call. The Indomitable raced through slipspace toward the Kelron Nebula, toward the Krathok swarm, toward a battle that would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. They were 8 hours away from showing the universe what Deathworlders could do.